Ryan Gosling. Ugh, it's literally me. Ugh. Oh, shit. I don't have an excuse this time. So today I wanted to come out here to answer a very important question, and that is, can you be poor and accurate? Today we have two very similar rifles. One has an $80 barrel, the other has a $600 barrel. Today I want to shoot these side by side and see if you really do need to drop your cold hard cash on an expensive barrel, or if you can get by with a budget barrel. So I'm going to talk about these guns, and then we're going to do some grouping with them, and we're going to shoot them out a little bit farther to around 500 yards and just see if we can tell a difference between the expensive barrel and the cheap barrel. All right, so these are the two rifles that we're going to be shooting today. These are both custom builds. These are not factory guns. These are both 16-inch guns, and they both have a 1:6 LPVO on top. The first one here, this is the one with the expensive barrel. This is sporting a Christensen Arms carbon fiber barrel. Now, at the time of recording this, these barrels are about $600 on Christensen Arms website. Of course, the huge selling point of a carbon fiber barrel is the weight savings that you get from having a very thick target style barrel, but most of it's carbon fiber, so it doesn't weigh very much. But carbon fiber is also much stiffer and more rigid than steel, so the barrels themselves are advertised as being more accurate because of the stiffness of the carbon fiber. It should also be mentioned that both of these barrels are 223 Wild 1-in-8 twist. The second gun that we've got here is another custom build. This is my friend's. I helped him put this together. And this barrel has a Bear Creek Arsenal barrel on it. This is a 223 Wild 1-in-8. Like I said, this is an M4 contour steel barrel. And when I checked the other day on their website, these are about $75, $80, which is actually quite a bit cheaper than I remember. But I think that'll make this test a lot more interesting to really see how this, what I would say a very cheap barrel, how it performs compared to a very expensive barrel. All right, so now we're all set up with our lead sled here just so we can get the most consistent results. I've got a target down there at 100 yards, and we're just gonna do 3 groups of 5 rounds with each gun at 100 yards to see how they group. We're starting off with the $80 barrel to set our expectations way down low so that hopefully the really expensive barrel impresses us and justifies the really expensive price tag. All right, we're going top right dot. Okay, there's our first 5 rounds. All right, I just ran up and looked at that group, and obviously this gun is not zeroed, but we can at least see how it's grouping. So now we're just gonna go ahead with the next 2 groups. All right, here we go, top left dot. The cold makes my eyes water. I'm not crying. All right, now we're going bottom dot. Okay, that's our 15 rounds. Let's go look at our target. All right, so we got our first 3 groups here, and you guys can see they're pretty awful. This first group on our top left target was not bad. These 4 right here are just about an MOA. Adding this one, you're probably about 2 MOA right there. For an AR and an $80 barrel, that's not bad at all. Our second group here opened up a lot. I mean, at this point, we're probably about 4.5 MOA group. That's pretty terrible. Now, of course, we're seeing a lot of inconsistency here. This first group is not bad. This second group is pretty bad. I personally really don't think that that was me because I'm shooting out of a lead sled. I have a super stable rest, and really the only thing on the gun that I'm touching is the trigger. Now, down here at the bottom dot is where it gets really, really bad because we actually have one down here. So if you count our 2 farthest away ones, that's like an 8 and 9 inches, which is just ridiculous. At 100 yards, that's 8 MOA-ish. I mean, that's really terrible if you're aiming at something this size and you could hit anywhere in this circle. That's just absolutely horrible. Of course, you can see we've got, you know, lowest here, highest here. That's just a crazy difference. Again, I really don't think that I pulled any shots here because the only thing I'm doing is just slowly squeezing that trigger and letting the lead sled do the rest. So these 3 here is not a bad group at all, but then you have these 2 flyers down here that just lead me to believe this barrel is extremely inconsistent. Because of these 2 groups opening way up like this, I think that our first group here was just lucky. This was a cold barrel. After this group, they really started to open up. For those of you guys that don't know, as a barrel heats up, metal expands, so it'll actually get a little bit less accurate as it heats up. So a cold barrel like this is usually more accurate than after it's been warmed, but usually 5 shots isn't quite enough to warm a barrel enough to see a difference like this. So I think this shows that we just have a very inconsistent barrel. Now, of course, this is just 3 groups. This doesn't necessarily tell us everything, even though this is pretty terrible. But we're gonna do a couple more tests other than this. We're gonna group it out a little bit farther, and then we're gonna try shooting a piece of steel that's about 450, 500 yards away and see if we can get consistent hits on it. But now that we've done this, let's go ahead, set up a new target, and we'll group the expensive barrel. I forgot to mention earlier, for all these tests, I am using Winchester M193, just 55 grain full metal jacket. All right, we've got our next target set up down there. We're ready to start shooting groups with the expensive $600 Christensen Arms barrel. Okay, there's our first 5. Okay, now bottom dot, next 5. There we go. All right, there's 5. All right, so here we have target number 2, and you can immediately see how much better these groups are. So our first group here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. Second group here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Third group down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, hey, for a $600 barrel, those groups are still pretty terrible for only being 100 yards. And to be honest, I think that's more of the scope than the barrel. With these LPVOs only going up to 6 power, that's not the greatest magnification for super pinpoint accuracy, and the reticle on these has kind of a dot right in the middle that mostly covers these green squares when I'm looking in the scope. So a lot of the variation in these groups is probably more because of the scope is just not purpose built for precision accuracy, but because both rifles are still running 1:6s, we can still get a consistent test out of both rifles to compare the two. And obviously you guys can see this expensive barrel did infinitely better than the $80 barrel. I believe this rifle is sighted in for 200 yards, which is why you're seeing most of the hits being a little bit above the green dots. At 100 yards, that's pretty much what we want. But really, when you think about the kind of accuracy that you're trying to get out of a rifle built with a 1:6 scope, this is pretty damn good, and I'm pretty happy with these results. Now, for comparison here, we can bring out the target from the $80 barrel. We have our top left dot here. These groups are pretty comparable. I'd almost say the cheap barrel did a better group than the expensive barrel in this case. But then if we move over to the top right dot, you can see pretty nice little group there. This one opened up a lot. That's a lot worse. And then of course the bottom group down here, where you have this kind of a spread on this group, and this group is all right here nice and tidy. That's much better. So we're seeing overall much better consistency out of the expensive barrel with these groups. Now I want to do a little bit more accuracy testing out to farther distances. On this range here, I can go out to about 250 to my next backstop, but of course at 250 those little 1:6 scopes are not going to be able to see these dots very well, so I'm just going to take these targets out and we're going to shoot for headshots just in this nice big square here at about 250 with these 1:6s, and we're going to see how we can do $80 barrel versus $600 barrel. Alright, so now we have our 2 targets down there at about 250. Now I'm just aiming for headshots here, but of course we found out that this rifle is not zeroed, so I know that at 200 I'll probably have to aim a little bit high to hit the head, so we'll see if I can even do that. I probably won't be able to tell from here with this scope, so we'll just have to hope for the best and then walk up there and look at it. But here we go. $80 barrel first. We're going 5 rounds on the left head. Okay, there's our 5. All right, here we go. This is the $600 barrel, 5 rounds on the right head. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the results are in, and to be completely honest, I'm extremely disappointed. Now, I'd actually heard pretty decent things about Bear Creek Arsenal before. I've heard that for the price, their barrels are usually pretty good. Now, of course, this is just one barrel, and it's on a setup that's not really built for accuracy. We're talking about a semi-auto platform. This is a custom build that I and my friend did ourselves. This is not a factory build, so there's a couple other things that could play into this. However, I know that the headspace on this rifle was checked and that it's in spec. The things that really should affect accuracy should be just fine. So really what we're seeing here is the performance of this barrel with this ammo that I'm running through it. Now, of course, 55 grain 223 is not a long range cartridge, but at the same time, 200 yards is not a long range in my opinion. 55 grain M193 should be pretty damn accurate and consistent at 200 yards, and that's just not what we're seeing with this barrel here. So to show you guys, I shot 5 rounds at each head. In this case, with the $80 barrel, I knew that it wasn't very zeroed, so I was aiming about right here, just above the head box. And what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Clear over here, round number 5, which is just unbelievable when you look at our kind of farthest spread. Between these rounds here, we've got about a foot of spread. At 200 yards, having a foot of variation between your hits is just absolutely abysmal. I can't stress that enough. That's horrible. Now, of course, like I said, this is one barrel. It doesn't necessarily mean that all Bear Creek Arsenal barrels are going to perform like this, but when you look at the groups at 100 yards and compare that with the group I got at 200 yards, you just kind of see that this barrel has horrible variation between the rounds and is not consistent at all. Now, moving over to the $600 Christensen Arms barrel, we got exactly what you would expect. Right here in the head, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know that this gun was zeroed at 200 yards, so I was pretty much just holding right here. And at 200 yards, we've probably got about 4 inches of spread at the most, which is going to be about 2 MOA. In my opinion, for most situations, that's very acceptable. That's the kind of performance that you want to see out of a decent barrel. Now, I think we can all agree with just from these few tests we've done that the $600 barrel is obviously doing much, much better than the cheap barrel. But I do want to do one more test. There's a piece of steel hanging up down there at about 500 yards. I'm going to take a few 5-6 rounds with each one of these guns and see how many times I can hit that piece of steel. Now, of course, if we're seeing that kind of variation out of that cheap barrel at 200 yards, we're probably going to be a few feet of variation at 500 yards, so who knows if I'll even be able to hit it with that gun. But I think this is just going to be a little bit more practical test with these guns, because if you have a 1-6 scope, chances are your definition of accuracy is going to be more focused towards shooting at a man-sized target at distance and not necessarily pinpoint MOA accuracy. So this is a little bit more practical test, and we'll just see how each gun can do. All right, we're going to go ahead and start off with the $80 barrel again. Now, of course, I don't have a spotting scope out here with me, and I don't have a spotter with me. It's just me out here. So I'm going to do my best to call these hits. Hopefully the camera will be able to hear the hit. But of course, I think the other tests have already proven that this barrel it really isn't worth using. So this is more of just a fun test to see if you could even hope to hit something at 500 yards with an $80 barrel. All right, here we go. I got 6 rounds in the gun. Just off the right side. Hit. Just underneath off the left side. Just underneath again. Hit. And way under. Holy cow. All right, so that was 2 hits out of 6. To give you guys an idea, I was holding in a different spot pretty much every one of those shots, because every time I would miss, it would miss in a different spot, and I would try to correct that miss, but then it would miss somewhere else because this barrel is just shooting all over the place. So 2 hits out of 6, but absolutely none of that was predictable. There wasn't a consistent windage that I could hold to get consistent hits on that target. That was just 2 lucky hits out of 6. All right, so now we got 6 rounds with the $600 Christensen Arms barrel, and I'm just gonna take a guess here of where to hold. Just to the right. Just to the right again. Hit. Just to the right. Hit. And that's a hit. All right, so that was 3 out of 6. Now, of course, you could say, well, that was 2 out of 6 and 3 out of 6. That's not that much better. And you're not wrong. That is only 1 more hit, but of course you guys can't see the target. That's just a constraint of my current camera equipment. You'll just have to take my word for it. But every single time I missed, it was just off the right side of the steel in the same spot every time. And once I got my windage down, I was holding in the same spot every time and was able to get consistent hits on the target, which tells you that this barrel is shooting in the same spot every time, and I just had to learn the windage for that distance. And once I found it, it was pretty easy to get consistent hits. With this cheap gun, or excuse me, the cheap barrel, the rest of this gun is not cheap, by the way. It was a pretty expensive build, but the barrel's pretty cheap. With the cheap barrel, I was not able to find a consistent windage to hold the crosshair on to get consistent hits, and it was missing in a different spot every time. All right, now just to show that, I'm gonna send another 5 rounds out of this guy, and we're gonna see how many hits I can get, because now I have a pretty good idea where to hold. Hit. 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 And that's a hit. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a 5 for 5. So there you guys can see, once I found my hold with this setup with our 1-to-6, this barrel is extremely consistent, and I was able to get every single hit right there on our 500-yard steel. All right, now, so to wrap this video up, I want to talk a little bit more about these two setups and my thoughts on cheap barrel versus expensive barrel. Now, after the testing we've done, I don't think anybody can argue that the $600 barrel, that the $600, oh my, dollar, I can't say that, that's racist. Now, after all the testing we've done, I don't think anybody can argue that the $600 barrel was head and shoulders above the $80 barrel, obviously for a reason. Now, to be completely honest, I was really hoping that this Bear Creek Arsenal barrel would do better than it did. I'm pretty disappointed in this performance. This is my friend's gun. I'm probably gonna go to him after this and tell him he needs to invest in a better barrel, because I wouldn't trust this barrel to really do anything. If you're shooting at 10-20 yards and you're running fast drills, it probably would do okay, but this gun has a 1-to-6 on it, so obviously it's meant to be able to reach out at distance, and this barrel just cannot do that. Now, with that being said, I have people that I know, and I've read lots of reviews online of other people that have said they've had really great experiences with Bear Creek Arsenal barrels. And that's really the reason that my expectations were a little bit higher. So in the future, I might try to get my hands on another one of these barrels, a different variation of one of their barrels, and do a little bit more testing. But if we're talking about just this one barrel on this gun, it did absolutely horrible, and I would not trust it for anything. Now, with that being said, does that mean that you need to go out and buy a $600 barrel? No, I don't think so. As with any setup or any part that you're looking at getting for your gun, I think it wholly depends on the purpose that you're building a gun for. The $600 carbon fiber barrel like this is really meant for the long-range precision shooter that just wants absolutely every tiny little bit of accuracy and consistency and longevity of accuracy that they can get. A huge advantage of a carbon fiber barrel is that carbon fiber does not retain heat the way that a steel barrel does. It dissipates heat much better. Earlier in the video, I explained that as a barrel gets hotter, the metal expands, and that makes it lose a little bit of accuracy. So with a carbon fiber barrel that does not hold on to as much heat, it takes longer to heat up, and you can keep your consistent accuracy for longer strings of fire than with a steel barrel. That's one of the big advantages of a carbon fiber barrel. Of course, the other huge advantage is the weight savings. If any of you have ever held or shot a gun with a carbon fiber barrel, you know how crazy light they feel. But of course, that's extremely use case. Not everybody needs a carbon fiber barrel on their rifle. Most of us, I would say, just need a good quality steel barrel, which is of course not this barrel. There are plenty and plenty of steel barrels out there in the $200 to $300 range, Faxon Firearms, some Geisley barrels, some BCM barrels. Why is it so hard for me to say barrels, brother? Any of those would perform absolutely perfect for your average Joe when you're building a basic setup like this. Of course, in this video, we're comparing AR barrels, and I think that people see ARs as an inherently less accurate platform. That's not necessarily true. I think that they can still be more accurate than most people. But of course, if you're the kind of person who's out there looking for accuracy, you're probably not going to be building an AR. You're probably going to be getting some sort of high quality bolt action gun. And that is really where talking about high quality carbon fiber barrels comes into play, is on bolt action guns. Now, of course, all of it is completely subjective, and it just completely depends on what you're trying to achieve. So to sum up my final thoughts after our testing here, $600 barrel, better than $80 barrel. $80 barrel, not worth your money, don't use it. $600 barrel, probably also not worth your money unless you're just big dickin'. No. Unless you're a competition guy trying to get the absolute best accuracy that you can, or you just want a Gucci gun that you know will hold accuracy for a long time. And I believe that for most people, the solution is somewhere right in the middle. Around a $200, $300 barrel is going to be perfect for most people. Now, if I'm being honest, the results of today's test did surprise me a little bit, simply because I expected this $80 barrel to do a little bit better than it did, but for $80, I guess I'm not disappointed. Now, if any of you guys watching this video have used Bear Creek Arsenal barrels, I would love to hear your experiences in the comments down below, because honestly, I might have just got a bad apple here and they might be better than this. It might be worth doing more testing with these barrels in the future. Let me know down below what you guys think, if you would like to see that, and if you think it's worth trying out another one of their barrels. If you guys did enjoy this video, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like down below, and let me know what other content you guys would like to see on the channel when it comes to testing firearms or just shooting in general. I love making these kinds of videos, and I am absolutely down to do whatever you guys want to see. And check in on your mom and dad, see how they're doing.